Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the City Commission joint meeting with the Budget Advisory Board. This is a joint workshop which we will begin or continue our conversation with regard to the 2025 preliminary budget. I want to thank you all for being here today, and I certainly want to thank the Budget Advisory Board for coming this morning and participating in this meeting. Would the chair please call the roll of the committee? Could you come up to the podium? I know, it's a long walk. You're good.
There, it should be on. Great.
By the way, the microphones are very sensitive, so you don't even have to get up that close to it. Go ahead.
Okay. William Brown. Good, there you go. Ross Camarada. Mildred Lowe.
Well, you have to say yes here. Okay.
Okay, good. Pabuli Mattel. John Rodstrom. Jeremiah Carter. Is absent. Melissa Milroy. Michael Marshall. And Mr. Lowe here.
Is there a quorum?
We have a quorum.
Okay, great. Mr. Clerk, could you please call the roll of the City Commission?
Commissioner Herbst? Vice Mayor Glassman? Here. Commissioner Beasley Pittman?
Here.
Commissioner Sturman?
Here.
Mayor Trentals?
Here, and we have full attendance with the City Commission. So I want to thank the Budget Advisory Board for coming today. Unfortunately, we have a very odd setup, you know, working with the board and the commission. Hopefully, when we move over to the Performing Arts Center after the break in August, we'll be able to have a much more user-friendly and participatory-friendly arrangement of chairs and so forth. Anyway, Jeff, it's all yours.
Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of the council. Since the Budget Advisory met with the City Commission, we have reviewed detailed information and heard presentations from each department director about operating challenges and program enhancement proposals for the fiscal year 2025 budget. I would like to thank each of the departments and their hard work and commitment to this process. At this meeting, we will hear from the city manager about the preliminary budget recommendations and the 10-year projections for key funds. This is an important part of the budget process as it allows for consideration of capacity for funding within the proposed rate structure that you will approve in July to be published on the trim notice. Due to the recent rain event, our board was not able to meet and make formal recommendations regarding the millage rate and the fire assessment rate. However, BAB has historically been in favor of full cost recovery through the fire assessment fees. In addition, we have proceeded throughout the budget development process under the assumption that the Commission was not interested in increasing the millage rate as mentioned during our last joint workshop. However, if there was capacity in the budget to fund additional initiatives, there are many department requests that BABS would have supported that fell under the Commission's priorities of public safety, infrastructure resilience, and public space enhancements. The city manager will share the proposed budget on July 2nd, and the Budget Advisory Board will meet with you again at a joint meeting on August 20th to provide the board's recommendations regarding the proposed budget prior to your two public hearings that take place September 3rd and September 12th. Due to the rain delay, we have no further recommendations at this time as it relates to the 2025 budget, and I'll be happy to answer any questions or comments.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Is there anyone from the City Commission who wishes to address the chair? Any questions regarding the budget? The preliminary information is 78 pages, light reading. Well, let me just say this. The fact that it's 78 pages, between you and staff, you know, it's really amazing how much work, how much time is put into this. I want to thank each and every member of the advisory board for the amount of time you put into this to try to refine numbers and to make appropriate recommendations when we finally have to make those decisions. I see that there have been some enhancements to the current staff. According to the recommendation, you want to add additional fire rescue staffing. You want to add additional police department staffing. You want to add a chief waterways officer, and improvements and maintenance to the city parks, as well as a shelter bed access program to support those experiencing homelessness. Those are very important things. We appreciate your responding to the City Commission, because these were objectives that the Commission has voiced multiple times. So we appreciate your trying to include that into the budget and still making the budget balance.
Correct.
Are we looking forward to a balanced budget, Mr. Chair?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
The ordinance tells us to make it balanced. We used a lot of whiteout, but that's okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Mr. Mayor? Yeah.
Yes.
Are we going to be going over this overview?
Say it again?
We're going to be going over the overview right now, I hope, right?
We can.
I would like that.
Okay. You sound like Lauren Bacall today.
Lauren Bacall. Wow.
Hold on. Is that exhibit 2?
Correct.
Yeah.
And Mayor Laura Reese, our acting
I don't-
assistant city manager, would be making a presentation when budget was done.
On exhibit number 2?
I couldn't pull up exhibit 2. It showed network error, so I never got to see. So this will be first blush. So what, you want to go over that? Why don't we go over exhibit 2? That's exhibit 2, correct?
Correct. Yes.
So why don't we start with that and use that as a framework to begin our discussion?
No, Madam Acting City Manager. Is that the correct title? Acting City Madam?
No.
Right, acting city manager, and Ben was acting.
Okay. Yeah. So you're going to do an actual presentation on this?
Yes, and Laura's going to be making that presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And acting would be an understudy.
Okay, let's go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. Laura Reese, City Manager's Office. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Budget Advisory Board. I feel like they're the most hardworking board in the city. They meet 14 times per year, and they really do look at all of the details and proposals, and they meet with department directors twice during the budget process. So thank you for your service. We were disappointed that their meeting on Wednesday was canceled due to the rain. So a lot of the items that they would have been presented with this preliminary budget at that meeting. And so they'll be hearing about it at the same time as you, but everyone got the memo ahead of time. I'd also like to acknowledge staff throughout the organization, the city manager, assistant city managers, department staff that come together with proposals and solutions to try to make the budget balanced. We have today our acting director of Office of Management and Budget, Yvette Matthews, and Parth Patel, the acting assistant director. They're going to be helping me with questions you might have throughout the process. The intent of this presentation is to get you all comfortable with what's in the proposed, what will be in the proposed budget. so that you feel good about setting the rate structure that you're going to be approving on July 2nd. Many cities, Commissioner?
Mr. Mayor, I just,
ma'am.
would you like us to, I think it would be better, I'm going to suggest that if we have questions, we do it as each slide comes up as opposed to waiting to the end. Because
If you have questions as she's going through the presentation, you're welcome to raise
right.
that point.
You don't mind us not waiting till the end, is that okay, Laura?
I think that's probably better, to your point.
Right.
So we're going through topic area by topic area, and if you have a question, we're available to answer at any time.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the overview provides the items that we will be reviewing. They're key aspects of just the general fund budget today. We won't be presenting all funds, but in the next portion of the meeting, we have Stantec to present the 10-year revenue sufficiency for all funds. But this is just really sharing with you what would be in the preliminary general fund budget so that you feel comfortable setting those rates. And then the proposed budget will come to you on July 2nd with those agenda items. So the first item everyone always talks about is ad valorem. So the property appraiser gives us on June 1st what they consider the preliminary tax roll, and that'll be updated in July 1st. July 1st number will be the one that we have to use when we adopt the budget in September, but understanding that you only meet once in the month of July, and that's on the 2nd, the day after we get it, we have to include the June 1st number in our proposed budget. This year, the increase in taxable value went up 7.81%, and that'll generate around $15 million in additional revenue to support the general fund budget. So some key items for consideration is that the new taxable value went down significantly from prior years. In prior years, it was $1.1 billion. This past year, as of January, it was $500 million. So the new taxable value is slowing in growth. You'll want to keep in mind that anyone who's homesteaded will be capped at that 3% cap. So the other value increase are from those who are not homesteaded. Any questions on that? Okay. And general fund, the general fund revenues are comprised of about half of the general fund revenues come from taxable value and ad valorem. The fire assessment is also a key consideration in your July meeting. We're allowed to charge an assessment fee for the costs to do the fire fire suppression, not for the EMS portion. So this year, there's a couple things that changed. We're moving to use more EMS. We're adding 3 people to rescue units, and there was some one-time costs in last year's budget for equipment. Because we remove those costs, the fire assessment fee will go down at full cost recovery. And we expect that to continue in future years as we add third people to the rescue unit.
I have to say, in all the years I've sat on this commission, I've never seen it go down, so congratulations.
All right. So we try to give you a snapshot of what this looks like for an average taxable value. So the average taxable value for a single-family home in Fort Lauderdale is pretty high. It's around $580,000. And
Laura, could you go back to the last slide? We had a question about that.
Yes.
So it went from 338 to 332. What does that number represent? That's the average per person?
The single family. So fire assessment is based on category. It's not based upon assessed value. So for a unit or a single family home, they would be paying $332. This assessment is still being updated. This is preliminary rate, but this is what we have as of now as they finalize the roll. It'll come to you in July.
Okay, so the question that we had when we were looking over this, the rate per person went down, therefore the net revenue went down.
Correct.
Is that because of a mandated formula that's used to calculate that? Is that how we came to that?
It's because the cost, there's 2 aspects of it. The amount in the budget went down because there was a one-time appropriation towards Fire Station 13 that needed some general fund revenue last year and also some equipment last year. So the amount that's being allocated is less. In addition, the number of EMS-related expenses is going up proportionate to the overall budget.
Okay, so per person, actually, their assessment went down.
Correct.
And the aggregate is $750K.
The estimated decrease in general fund as of the time we did the preliminary budget was $750,000 decrease from fiscal year '24.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And so this is the impact, the estimated impact for average taxable value of $580,000. With the millage rate, what we did is we assumed that the property value went up by that 3%, which is the homestead cap, and everything else is based upon the assessment that's being included in the proposed budget. So $102 a year, or around $8 a month, would be the increase for your residents. Any questions here? Okay. So I won't go through one by one the key expense changes, but salaries and benefits and insurance result in increases of around $18.6 million. And those increases were partially offset through some one-time expenses that were included in the fiscal year '24 budget that we didn't need to include. And one of the ongoing decreases to note is the decrease in the transfer to Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport, because 2024 was the last year that we had to pay for using that land towards the soccer stadium. Key revenue changes. Revenues went up by $18.2 million. The main one was ad valorem taxes, which we talked about, and also utility tax revenues drove the rest of that increase, and a few other items, resulting in a surplus of $2.6 million that the city manager was able to use to enhance services in the preliminary budget. So the strategic enhancements being proposed, I'll just go through one by one. There's Laserfish upgrade in addition of a senior technical support analyst for the clerk's office. The next one is a chief waterways officer. We are estimating that 50% of the expense would be paid through the stormwater fund and 50% through the general fund. This represents the general fund portion. And neighbor support, the shelter bed access program will come to you mid-year in the current fiscal year, and we are recommending budgeting for the full amount in next fiscal year. Strategic communications requested a part-time graphic designer to assist with their initiatives, and we heard the commission say that you wanted new placemaking signage for the Henry E. Kinney Tunnel, and the cost of that is estimated at $49,000. Other items include fire rescue.
Hold up. Okay, for the tunnel, this came up too. DOT, did they, I guess when they finished there, did they just put Kenny E., the name of the tunnel the way it is?
I see our acting coming to answer that.
This is to do placemaking for the Riverwalk.
Have we done nothing? They would have put the name on it anyway. This is to add Riverwalk to it, or we would have to do it either way.
Correct. This is just for the branding that the community's requested to do Los Olas Riverwalk above it. And staff is working on that. We have some renderings, working with the community on it, and we're looking to figure out different opportunities on moving it forward.
So $49,000, that's the price of the sign. That's the additional price of the sign.
Correct. $49,000 is for one portal tunnel right now. We're trying to work with the community to figure out how we can get some private equity to match that, and so we can do both ends.
All right. So other key increases are adding for one additional medical unit. So we're adding 5 lieutenants, and that would staff 1 unit 24 hours a day in the fire rescue department. Also, DC Alexander Park will be operational next year, we're hoping, and so there's some needs that come along with opening a new park that's estimated at $160,000 a year. We are tonight bringing to a contract to switch from an in-house tennis program to a contract, and the cost of that is around $95,000 extra per year, and removal of an FTE. Also, we heard from you that splash pads were an issue throughout the city, so Parks has proposed a program to enhance maintenance, adding a FTE to manage that program, and bringing some of those services in-house. For police, one of their big...
Okay,
Yes,
I
sir.
hate to, I mean,
No.
as these come up, these are things we've heard for. Is that 74K, it's over 1,000, is that for the salary only for one person whose job it is for the splash pad that came up? Or is that, I mean, or is that, whoever's going to be having that, were they going to do plumbing throughout the city, or is that other things in addition to salary, that's 74,000?
So there's two pieces to it. We have an existing contract to maintain our splash pads. It's removing that contract, adding a person, and adding some related costs to maintain the splash pads.
That's not $74,000 a year for one employee whose only job it is to maintain the splash pad.
That's the net cost of the splash pad program, including adding a person and removing a contract and adding some parts and
That includes
miscellaneous
maintenance and
costs.
things like that, other
Yes.
costs, and it's not just salary, okay.
Right.
We only have one splash pad, right?
No,
Where else do we have splash pads? I thought we had
Carl is coming.
one at the Las
We ju-
Olas Oceanside Park.
And we just approved one for Warfield Park also.
Okay, but why are we worrying about maintenance for one that we haven't built yet and we're probably still under warranty?
So as part of the bond, we're actually adding in a couple splash pads.
Right.
Zero depth, which doesn't require a lifeguard to be present. So essentially, Bass Park, Oswald, we have the Loop, Warfield, Holiday. So we're getting an additional 4 to 5 splash pads into our system that we currently have.
Right, I understand that. So but currently there's just one. There's more than one?
Two.
There's
9?
9?
So keep in mind too that when we talk about splash pads, we're also talking about fountains too that we take care of throughout the city. Like I know City Hall was down, but we also did the maintenance for that as well. We have one. We have actually several throughout the city. I'm kind of drawing a blank at the moment, but we do have extra fountains that we do currently maintain as a department.
Well, those are fountains, not splash pads.
Fountains and splash pads. But as part of the initial thought here was that as part of the bond, when we bring this online, those are going to be incorporated into our.
All right, so this line item isn't just for splash pads, this is for the fountains as well. Okay. Thank you.
all right. So other key enhancements being recommended are related to the janitorial and maintenance services. You're opening a new police headquarters in the upcoming years, which is exciting, and police has indicated having in-house staff works better for them. So this is adding 4 positions to help to maintain. School zone speed enforcement program, you heard about that in a prior conference meeting. Between that and the detail office administration, 5 positions will be needed to support this.
Could I ask you a quick question about that?
Absolutely.
So I saw that cost. Presumably that's for the officer that's going to have to review the violations?
And some administrative staff,
Right.
correct?
Okay. Is there, and I didn't see it in there, an associated revenue? Because there's supposed to be a revenue share that comes along with this too, that should at least be enough to offset this. And I just want to, I didn't happen to see that when I was looking through the budget. I may have overlooked it. Wouldn't be the first time I missed some stuff. So, Chief, how are you, sir?
Good afternoon. Bill Schultz, Police Chief. Reference the school zone. Yes, that would be an administrative staff needed to review the citations. Once a company is chosen, they do the first review.
Right.
But they send a number of violations over that we then have to review ourselves, sign off on, and then this staff will be the staff that goes to court to defend against those.
So this is similar to the red light traffic violations where it has to be
Similar.
done by a sworn law officer in order to issue the
Correct.
citation, right? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So is there an associated revenue with this that'll balance this out? Or do we not appropriate revenue this time because we're not sure what the number is going to be?
I'll ask staff to pull the revenue, but the detail office admin program is cost neutral in the decision package. The speed zone enforcement did contemplate some revenue, but the revenue was estimated to be lower than the expenditure for the program.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the budget currently includes $300,000 in anticipated revenue associated with the program, but it is lower than the total $500,000 cost of operating the program. So it's a net of about $175 between the two.
Okay, that's interesting, because I know when we've talked to all these vendors, they've always flipped that the other way and said that these programs generally, at the very least, pay for themselves if not being revenue positive. And I understand we don't have a track record yet, so it's hard to estimate that.
And we really need to complete our traffic studies first as well, and that will assist us in generating a more accurate estimate.
Chief,
The
can you-
vendors, I'm sorry, the vendors do the traffic studies, don't they?
It's
Or are we doing it?
normally, it's normally included as part of their proposal.
Right, okay, to determine where the most propitious place to actually put them is going to be. All right, great.
Chief, can you just clarify, because I thought this was different from the red light camera program in that it didn't require a certified officer to do the review.
It still requires certified civilians. So
Civilians,
it's our
okay.
public safety aides. There's going to be 2 of them assigned to the office.
Okay, so we don't need a Leo on this, we could have a civilian staff.
On the school zone program, correct, yes. It's going to be basically it's an administrative type level that will be reviewing them and then going to court.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Well, John, I had the same question. I had thought that when we had approved it, it was going to be at the very least cost neutral, I thought, when it was presented to us.
And I suspect it may be in the long run. It's just that, without a track record, it's hard for the budget office to come up with a projection that they can, substantiate. So we may wind up with a mid-year budget appropriation if we see additional revenues coming in, hopefully. But if not, I still think this is an important thing. I tell you, one of the most frequent complaints I get with respect to speeding in the neighborhoods is around schools like Sunrise Middle and so forth. So,
Right.
yeah, I think this is a great program.
And Commissioner, if I may clarify, these are 2 different programs, but will be within the same office, basically. And we have asked for a supervisor to watch over both offices and primarily the detail office. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And moving along, there was a recruitment and retention bonus program that was proposed by police. Part of that would come out of salary savings from the position, but part of it actually goes to the community as it's being proposed, where neighborhood organizations would be able to find a police officer in the community, and the HOA would get a reward based upon finding somebody internally. So that's what that $100,000 represents. Again, the programs are still being developed, their proposals during budget. Our Resilience Outreach Coordinator is also being recommended in the Public Works Department to support our community in becoming more resilient, particularly as it relates to securing flood insurance and those sort of things. And
One full-time employee, that's more than employee costs, right?
that's mostly employee-related costs and I think some marketing, but it's primarily related to the costs associated with rent and the place to house an employee, the salaries, all of the related costs. And then another item we were told by TAM needs to be done as part of a commitment to the county is intersection improvements on Las Olas and Southeast 2nd Avenue. That's $45,000. That's a one-time cost. So we know that police and fire still are priorities for the commission. Understanding there's strategic enhancements included. We wanted to make sure we also reiterated some of the other items that are built into the budget that will move forward your priorities related to public safety. In the police department, we've added 41 positions as a city since 2022, representing that commitment. Also, $2 million in ongoing enhanced funding for the FOP agreement is built into the budget. There's additional pension and wages benefits for specialized units that are part of the new contract. All of that's baked into this budget. We have enhanced funding to launch the school zone program we just talked about. $233,000 for license plate reader expansion plan that you'll find in the replacements in the back of the preliminary budget. Again, the state-of-the-art facility is expected to open in fall of 2025. Everyone's really excited about that. And mid-year during 2024, the City Commission approved the community-oriented policing grant, and that added 6 police officers and 1 civilian co-responders. So that'll become a responsibility of the general fund once the grant runs out, but that was 7 positions that were added since the 2024 budget was adopted that will continue to receive funding. For fire rescue, 46 new positions were added since 2022. They're receiving ongoing funding. And again, the compensation was negotiated after last year's budget, before this year's budget, all of that's baked into the new budget. We have $803,000 included in the budget for critical equipment for fire rescue. Fire station development, we're still finishing the last of the fire bond projects, Fire Station 13, and we're planning towards Fire Station 88, a new EMS station, and then an additional station on Las Olas. So all of those are contemplated in the budget and the CIP. And then also, Fire Rescue received City Commission approval to apply for the SAFER grant. They've applied to receive funding for 28 additional positions. And if awarded, the city will need to commit $3.5 million over the next 3 years to support that program. So homelessness also remains a priority. We talked about the new funding for the shelter bed program, but there's ongoing funding in these other areas, and all of that is included as one of your exhibits to share with you the total amount funded for homelessness in our community.
Could you back up just a bit?
Absolutely.
Let me study this a little bit more.
I can go through them one by one if you'd like, or if just give you a second. Yes? Okay. So for the Neighbor Support Office, there's $133,000 for an administrator position, $315,000 to continue the Housing Navigator program, which is the partnership that we expanded. The county provides a certain level of service, and we expand that through our own contract. The community court program comes to the general fund an expense of $204,000 a year. We're going to include funding to commit to continuing that program next year. And then the new funding for the shelter bed access program that's coming to you mid-year is included in the 2024 budget.
Does this $204,000 for community court recognize the money we just received from the state?
This is just the ongoing operating cost, so it includes an FTE as well as the normal operations for that program. What we do is when we receive a grant, this would be our second or third year receiving a grant for that program, we end up offsetting some of the general fund impact, but the person is housed in the general fund, so we still support that position.
Right, but the $204,000 then does not, so do you, what is it, $175,000 we got from the state?
I don't recall the exact amount, but what it ends up offsetting is the cost that we have for renting a facility, any costs associated with, they do bus passes, those types of services, sometimes the community shower program, all of those things are ongoing operating costs. So when we receive a grant, we usually offset some of those costs.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And a lot of grant-funded activities come through our entitlement funds. The city is an entitlement community, so we receive CDBG, home, SHIP, and HOPWA funds. And so 7.6% or $7.6 million is spent on the housing opportunities for persons with HIV and AIDS to support housing, rent, and mortgage assistance, $2.1 million for home. That's the state program for those experiencing homelessness. $1.4 million for SHIP to prevent homelessness. $202,000 in our home program to support affordable housing, and $226,000 in CDBG to support the local homeless assistance organizations.
So these grants for folks who are unhoused, homeless people, that's transitional housing? That's not permanent supportive housing, is it? Do you know? Is it mixed? Do we know?
I just look back at Cephas.
HOPWA, for example, is that permanent supportive housing, or is that transitional housing? What is that? I mean, I used to be on the board of Broward House, but I don't know what the program is today.
Hello, Mayor Anthony Fajardo. I believe those programs are used to stabilize individuals, but they're not ongoing. So if someone needs to get into housing, let's say they're having an issue with paying their rent or getting some other program up and running, they go into that, get stabilized, and then they move on from there.
Somebody at risk too, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Laura, before you go on to the next slide, first of all, thank you very much for doing this. I appreciate the work and the information. 2 questions on the slide. 330 for shelter bed access program. Could you, what does that actually go for? I didn't want to get a breakdown on that.
So this is the new program that's being recommended, and it's to commit to certain shelter beds being committed to the city, where the city would have place to put folks that are homeless. It would be temporary. I believe it was pitched with up to 60 days, but Anthony seems.
Yeah, it's temporary. So we've never had shelter beds dedicated to the city. We've always worked with the county on finding available beds, which is a little bit of been an issue. So the neighbor support team was able to identify a program that had, I believe, 24 beds. So that's where these would.
But these are not new shelter beds. These are just taking beds that are already out in the community and
They were
committing them to
beds
us.
that became available because the program had some capacity. I can't remember the name of the organization. They're actually in Hollywood.
Okay, and these will be for Fort Lauderdale.
It would be dedicated to Fort Lauderdale.
Okay, and Laura, maybe you shouldn't go too far, Anthony. Stay right there. 310 for Mobile Integrated Health Program. Is that, just want to touch upon that?
So this was a new program, I believe, last year, Fire Rescue. It's a team of folks, I believe they're all sworn firefighters that go into the community and they provide needed care in the community versus having folks call 911. The intent of this program when it was proposed to the Budget Advisory Board last year was to prevent repeat 911 calls.
So you know what type of, I'm medical, I hate to.
So Chief.
You know what type of?
I'm not sure of the outcomes right now, but yeah, the program as it was presented last year to the Budget Advisory Board before it's funded was to try to prevent homelessness or homeless folks from calling 911. It was providing services to them in the community.
And my backup question I will ask you is are we funding this ourselves or do we have a partnership with any other healthcare facility?
This is general fund.
Like one of the hospitals, nobody participates.
So Jeff Lucas, Deputy Fire Chief for Lauderdale Fire Rescue. So our MIH program has one civilian and one sworn employee. So their job is to go out and look at the many calls of service. If someone calls more than once to 911 system, they visit, they do follow up after the hospital, try to eliminate the next call. They also go out to these homes, make sure that they're getting the medicines they need, getting the services they need.
To people that have homes, or is it homeless per se?
It's everything. So they could be in their homes and they could be homeless.
Or you would respond to people
They're
at large?
dealing with the call. So the call to 911 determines where they're coming from.
Okay, thank you very much.
Jeff, before you move, just a little bit more detail about those who actually call and who we're servicing with the more opportunity. If you could go into details, because it seems like my colleague thinks it's only for homelessness, but we have a large influx of neighbors who call 911 for everything.
Yes, ma'am.
And this particular program, the way I understand it, it helps to keep that service down and also service those individuals who do not necessarily need to call 911 for a service. If you could clarify that a little bit
So
more.
just to reiterate, if a call comes from someone's residence, wherever they live, we visit that home after the second call and make sure we go out and see if they're getting the needs they need so that they don't continue to call 911 or go to the hospital. That includes the follow-up with making sure they're getting all the medicines they need, with seeing the right doctors. Some folks may need to see a different type of doctor, and they make sure that they're guiding them and counseling them into that right direction.
And that includes those calls for service or transportation to hospital and appointments as well,
Yes.
right? Okay. Because that's, this program really, from what I understand, it offsets a lot of the calls that could be directed in a different manner, and it saves on how our services are used, where they could be used in a more necessary opportunity.
Yeah, a lot of people call 911 and they're getting the wrong services, so they like to direct them to make sure they're getting the appropriate services. And that doesn't always mean go to the hospital.
Got it. Thank you.
Jerry just indicated that the HOPWA programs are more permanent vouchers, so we can share that on her behalf. So that's more permanent housing. Any more questions on this slide? Okay.
So let me just kind of jump in. I was just waiting for you to kind of finish up the whole area. So we're spending a lot of money on homeless programs, and I'm just not convinced that we're getting a lot out of it. So what do we have in terms of outcomes? So we talk a lot about benchmarking, about inputs, so we know how much money we're spending. We know how many beds are available. We talk about how many contact hours or how many people we've talked to. But none of that really effectively measures what the programs do. So what are our outcomes? And I don't need an answer right now. I'm just telling you that I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing $13 million in total being spent on homeless programs from all sources within the city. And I want to know how many people are off the street and gone and not coming back. And so I want, again, outcomes, not outputs, not contact hours, not number of people. I don't care how many people we talk to. That's irrelevant. It's how many people are we moving out of homelessness into something permanent. So at some point, I don't need it now, and I'm just going to make kind of a broader statement too. So I don't expect to be engaging too much in questioning a lot of the stuff that's in the budget today. We'll have ongoing discussions, you know, as I want to get down into details with everybody about this stuff between now and September when we actually adopt it. So I don't want to, you know, drill too heavily into that stuff. But these are the kinds of things that I'm looking for in all these programs, is I want to know what our outcomes are. So sometime between now and, you know, the next couple of months, let's kind of just circle back and help me understand about the effectiveness of the programs. You know, when I used to do auditing, this is what we call a performance audit. We tell if our programs are actually accomplishing anything for all the money we spend on them. I don't want to waste money. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Understood. When we do intend on meeting with each one of you individually, we've done at least a couple of you so far, so we're getting there. We'll have that conversation. No problem.
All right, yeah, we're trying to hit all the high points of what we think would be topics of conversation. There's other priorities. They're included in, there's an exhibit to the preliminary memo where we've identified all of the priorities you told us you had in January, and we showed you how much funding is being appropriated in the budget that's aligned with those priorities. They'll be updated just slightly before proposed. So special events in public places activation typically is an area of discussion. In this year's preliminary budget, 31 city events, as well as the activation of Riverwalk and Loop, are included at a cost of $1.9 million. Here are the specific events. For not-for-profit funding, the amount stayed similar to prior years, and the organizations are being recommended similar to prior years. To continue the partnerships, typically for not-for-profits, we're partnering with organizations that provide services to our community that we don't provide ourselves. Example, area-wide Council on Aging, we provide matching funds for our elderly individuals to get meals at home. We pay pennies on the dollar. Early Learning Coalition for our folks who have low income and need childcare. First Call for Help, we partner with Broward First Call for Help in order to provide listening and crisis intervention. Junior Achievement of South Florida, the city is providing a $10 amount for every child in 5th grade and 8th grade so that those folks can attend the Junior Achievement BizTown and Finance Park. Museum of Discovery and Science, we support our 5th graders in a special program related to STEM and a visit to the museum. NSU, $500,000 a year to support the museum and the operating costs. Stranahan House, this is our number 5 of 5. Our 5th payment out of 5 towards the $500,000 that the city committed for a welcome center. And so they use the money, they put the money in escrow and they're using it towards the construction costs. CIP for 2025, the general...
I'm sorry, Laura, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sir.
Can we just go back to, well, actually, that's okay. You want to finish or are you going to go past this slide? I just want to ask a question about
So
this slide.
this was all I had prepared for not-for-profits, if you had a question.
I do, and I don't know how realistic this is this coming fiscal year, but recently, and I am a firm supporter of arts and cultural funding and what that does for our community. But I also know that we took a big hit in Broward County with the recent budget. Statewide, we saw about a $32 million veto of arts and cultural funding. In Broward, we were impacted by over $3 million. I don't know if we could ever have this discussion. I know that this has been tough in the past, but I know that a lot of our arts and cultural organizations are hurting, smaller ones. I know that a couple of years ago we did try and fund some. Again, I understand, I'm a realist, I know this is a tough haul, but I did want to make that statement because those organizations in our community did take a big hit that they were not expecting to take. That's all I'm going to say. So if you guys can have that conversation. Again, I'm a realist. I know what we're facing. But I don't know if there is a possibility for that. I'm just mentioning what happened recently. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. In the community investment plan, the CIP outlines project by fund every project that's being recommended over the next years, including unspent balances in existing projects. In fiscal year 2025, out of the general capital fund, we're recommending cash funding of around 22 million. This has gone up just a little bit since preliminary. And really, the items that are being supported are bridges, roadways, sidewalks. It's all the basic replacement items in the city. Also really important to the city are replacement plans. So although nobody talks about them a lot, we've made sure we included them as exhibits.
I apologize.
No,
if we
Vice
can just
Mayor?
go back to that last slide.
Absolutely.
Okay. So one of the conversations I've had with some of the neighborhood presidents in my district deal with some of those things. There is a new CIP line for $200,000 for Central City CRA Streetscape project. Could I just get some clarification on that a little bit? I'm trying to find out exactly what that's for, and also the fact that many neighborhoods like Middle River Terrace, central lines are faded, markings are faded. I think we have to do a better job in maintaining some of those street markings that we have throughout the city, not just Middle River Terrace. But I think it's really important that we look at that, and I want to find out how that is going to be impacted in this year's coming budget. Are we going to go out and do a better job of maintaining those markings and signage and things that have been funded for a long time? For instance, again, Middle River Terrace we're approved for speed humps. That hasn't happened. I'm just trying to get a sense of that. Maybe Milos, if you could address some of that, or Ben, but I know that I'm hearing that a lot from neighborhoods like that.
And while Milos is coming up, I'll share for the Central City, the CRA, they recommended funding mid-year, and I believe they're adding additional funding in the upcoming budget for the same project. It's sort of almost like a holding account to do priority projects that are streetscape related. So they're still scoping them out from what I understand, unless Anthony has additional information.
That extra $200,000 line item, is that to move the Northeast 13th Street merger project from west to east? Is that to move that to the railroad tracks? I'm just trying to get a little bit more clarity on where that is.
It's still being scoped from, we recently met with the chair of the advisory board, and it seems like they're still providing specific scopes around what they would like to have completed. I don't believe we have any specific scopes, because what will happen is that holding account project will come to you through a budget amendment, and we'll move money from there into a specifically scoped project that tells you exactly, the boundaries, what's being done. We don't have a proposal to bring forward to you at this point. Milos?
Milos Majstorovic, Acting Director. There is nothing more that I have to add on this specific question, but the scope for that particular project has not been defined, and we do not have any funding for it at this point.
So what is that line? That line item, is that you just said a placeholder for that $200,000 in CIP funding?
So are you looking on this slide, or are you looking at the CIP?
I'm sorry, CIP.
Okay, in the CIP, it's the Central City CRA, and mid-year, the Central City CRA recommended really, they want to make improvements to their streetscapes, to their lighting, to a variety of different things. And they're meeting in the upcoming months to scope out what they really want to prioritize. And then those projects will come back to you with specific scopes. At this point, we do not have that. They're just dedicating $200,000 of their balanced budget to move forward those initiatives.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a question? I don't see any line item for sidewalk replacement. Am I not seeing it?
It's the annual concrete and paver stones contract. That is the replacement sidewalks. And the annual asphalt resurfacing would be your street resurfacing. So streets and sidewalks, those are the two line items.
So we're just allocating 1.5 million every year for sidewalks?
In future years, you'll see we're trying to increase that amount. So by 2029, we have programmed as part of the balanced budget 3.5 million, but in the 2025 budget, that was the capacity that was recommended. If there are one-time amounts over the 25% fund balance, and we'll have a conversation about that, you could always dedicate extra fund balance to do that as well.
So I direct this to my colleagues on the commission. We once talked about doing a bond issue for a citywide sidewalk restoration and replacement program. And we need to resurrect that conversation because this, 1.5 million is not doing it. And it concerns me because there's a lot of neighborhoods that are really clamoring for sidewalks because kids walk to and from school and just people walking their dogs and just people walking, and I think the last time we had this conversation, we asked city staff to come back to us with a budget as to what it would cost to do that. So I put that back on you now. Okay. So next time we talk, if you could go to the Public Works or whatever. Is it Public Works, Alan? Do you do sidewalks? Okay. Sidewalks are us? Okay. So if we could, I don't know where you are in that. I know you've got your hands full with a lot of different things going on, but at some point we would like to see what a budget would look like to fulfill the master plan that was once created in order to, where we identified sidewalk need as well as to, for the cost of fulfilling that need. And at some point, I'd like to ask the commission to consider a bond issue to move forward more aggressively with sidewalk replacement.
Thank you for bringing that up.
And
Laura, wasn't there a $3 million grant from the county or something that I remember reading about? Wasn't there a big pot of money with the county for sidewalks or some fund? Something's ringing a bell and I can't think of exactly what it was.
So when it comes to the sidewalks and particularly building new sidewalks, we are in the process of conducting sidewalk master plan. It's the first citywide master plan for the sidewalks. That effort should be completed by end of this year, early next year, and it will prioritize the need and how we should go about filling out the gap.
So we are studying it then?
Correct.
Wasn't that plan supposed to have been completed by last summer? Is that the same plan?
No, it started last year, but it will be completed, including prioritization and community input by late this year, early next year. Okay. So we'll know exactly what the level of gap is and how much in terms of funding we would need to fill out everything. Obviously, we'd have to prioritize it.
And when do you think we might have that?
When we would have that?
Yeah.
Early next year, early calendar year 25.
Okay, all right.
And there is some surtax funding also. A couple of months ago, we brought a camp before the City Commission to advance some of the sidewalk construction that is part of the surtax funding as well. And we will obviously continue looking for any additional funding opportunities in the future.
So did we get $3 million from the county?
I don't recall the exact number, but I can get it for you and I can provide
I'm just recalling something to that effect. And also, if we could also have a conversation, I think my office did share with you the letter we received from the president of Middle River Terrace from June 5th. I'd like to go over those because most of those fall under TAM, and they don't seem unreasonable. So maybe if we can have a discussion about that, I would
absolutely
appreciate that.
We have reviewed the letter and we are ready to discuss with you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Before we go, Ben, are you still here? Or did Ben leave the room? Didn't we? Didn't we discover that the transportation sales tax money could be used for sidewalks? When he comes back in the room, we'll ask that question. But I thought that at one of my MPO meetings, it was discussed that sidewalks could be included in the ask for money from that fund.
I think, as I recall, certain programs, not in general, but certain programs where the sidewalk is a piece of a program, they could do that. Does that sound right?
Why don't we wait for Ben to come back and we'll ask him? All right. Thank you. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's an important thing that we keep hearing from our community about sidewalks. So, okay.
Yes, and EVAT pointed out as well that there's also 800, these are highlights, but there's also $870,000 included in the CIP for gap sidewalks analysis, like the gaps that need to be filled in.
Right.
So these are for replacement, and then there's 870 for new sidewalks to bridge the gap between existing sidewalks. All right, so the last slide that we just wanted to highlight to you all is sort of your discussion about replacements. We want to make sure that in the city's budget, we're planning to replace the items that we've purchased. So we do that with fleet. The total fleet, all funds replacement is $21 million this year. And so that's baked in. About half of that is in the general fund. You know, police vehicles, fire vehicles, they're all expensive. And we want to make sure we have vehicles that work so we can serve our community. Fire rescue equipment is included to the tune of $803,000. Police equipment around $600,000. License plate readers have been a huge success. I love to hear the stories that police come back with. They're doing some crime fighting with no people, so that's a real good value. We're replacing them to the tune of $233,000. We also do animal replacement. So our dogs get to retire just like people, as do our horses. We do bulletproof vests. In IT, we're doing PC replacements every year to make sure that we have fresh equipment to keep us working, and also various equipment throughout the organization. Any questions on this?
That's not bulletproof vests for the animals.
I'd have to defer to my police counterparts. I believe these are all.
You said that a mile away.
And I was told that bulletproof is not the correct term anymore, ballistic vests.
Okay, but it's
so we'll have to change that.
Okay, and I hope they have a good retirement plan for the, I mean, this is dogs and horses, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Regarding our animals, our horses and our dogs, what is the years of service, the average year of service for our horses and our dogs?
Let me look on the plan. I think it's 7.
So that's really 49 years in their life, Commissioner, just so you understand.
Yeah, I can provide that to you. We typically try to put the number of years in here, but I'll provide that to you if it's not listed in the attachment.
Maybe the police chief knows the answer.
With horses, well, with both, it obviously depends on how they are in health when they reach us. Some of them they're not puppies necessarily when they come to us, or young horses. Depends on what stage of life they are in. She is correct. Normally, you're going to see 5 to 7 years, but it really depends on a number of factors.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. That concludes my presentation. The next item on the agenda is the long-term revenue sufficiency plan, but I'm happy to take more questions.
Before we go to that, could I just ask you a question about the attachment 3 that we received in our backup? This was the commission priorities, and it was basically grouped by priorities, and then there was explanations for each one.
Yes, what is your question?
Attachment 3. So underneath transportation and traffic, help me understand, I didn't realize there was a need, but it says that the Transportation and Mobility Department budget includes approximately $376,000 to provide for a security presence at the Performing Arts Center garage. So what's up with that?
So I believe
Yeah, good afternoon, Ben Rogers, Acting Assistant City Manager. So, Vice Mayor, the Performing Arts Center garage has its own operating budget, and during the COVID years, we made some operational adjustments. We scaled back some of the services because the venue wasn't operating. And since that time, we've been working with the Performing Arts Center and the DDA on restoring some of those services. And so it's bringing back some of the service levels that were in place before COVID.
So do our partners at the garage also contribute to security?
Yes, that whole agreement has a cost share and revenue share formula to it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Do you ever see anybody at this parking garage? I never see a security person.
Well, maybe that's why we need the $376,000.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a security person there, but whatever.
All right.
Okay, any other questions of Laura?
All right, so I guess if IT could pull up the next presentation, and I'll transition it over to Yvette Matthews, who will introduce our.
Okay, great.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Yvette Matthews, Office of Management and Budget. So each year, our city completes a 10-year revenue sufficiency model where we ensure that the rates that we're setting and the programmatic enhancements that we're making will set the city up for a great financial position for the next decade. We feed into this model all of our planned projects as well as policy decisions. One of the great ones that you all would probably be interested in is our increase in sidewalk funding, our increase in asphalt resurfacing. So we plan on getting both of those things up to almost over $3 million in FY 2029. So we feed all of that information into the model to make sure that our current rates will sustain those increased expenditures. This is intended to be an interactive discussion, so please feel free to ask questions along the way. I'm going to turn it over to Andy Burnham, from Stantec Consulting, and they've been working with the city for a long time, so they're really intimately aware of our projects, so feel free to ask any questions that you have. Thanks, Andy.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners, Budget Advisory Board. Andy Burnham with Stantec. I wanted to go through a portion of the presentation today for some of the major enterprise funds as well as the general fund. And then I did include some other information for some of your special funds that we can go through as well if you have questions on that. But I wasn't necessarily planning to go through presentations as those funds are in pretty good health, and it's really kind of steady as we go with the current plans for those. But fundamentally, as Yvette was saying, this process is really intended to put a telescope on your current year budget decisions, take into account changes in current economic conditions, assumptions, inflation factors, needs, as Yvette also indicated, and provide a framework to evaluate your adequacy of your rates, fees, charges, taxes to cover those needs and to evaluate different scenarios. And it's really insightful for the budget development process to understand what you're able to do in terms of strategic service level enhancements now and what are the future requirements of those enhancements as we look ahead to the future. So we do this in tandem with the budget development process, so a significant amount of involvement from OMB, but also the departments as well. And so I want to acknowledge that participation in the process. I appreciate them making time for us to help make sure we get the latest from the practical perspective, the boots on the ground, what's happening in these different enterprise funds and services. So we've got the most current information that we can as part of this process, leveraging 23 actual results, the 24 amended budget, the preliminary budget with the decision packages that you just heard many of the details about, as well as the 5-year community investment plan. We've also, for certain enterprise funds, particularly water and sewer, try to take into account current revenue trends, as some of those revenue streams are variable, like water sales. And we've also factored in some big picture items as part of the planning process, certainly incorporated the lease rental expense for interim city hall, but then did a plan for a new expenditure for a new city hall starting in 2027. That would be $10 million a year of effectively principal and interest as a placeholder assumption for now, and then allocated that across the enterprise funds. And so that's pervasive throughout the analysis as well to make sure we're planning for that. So as indicated, I'd like to go through the general fund, water and sewer, stormwater and sanitation. The other 4 funds are in your packet, and I'll be happy to answer questions about it. But for each, I'd just like to go through some key observations, revenues and expenses, what we're seeing in terms of some scenarios, and then some high-level benchmarking in terms of how your rates and charges and taxes compare to others. So starting with the general fund, as you've heard about already, we factored in the adjustments to the fire assessment for 2025 that you had the discussion about, and factored in future corresponding small adjustments downward, reflecting the additional third-person lieutenant on the rescue units that's associated with emergency medical services that will again affect those allocations going forward as you've discussed. We've also factored in the most recent taxable value increase. The 6.9% is the increase over the current year estimates. The 7.8 is kind of tax value from 23 to 24. So we're using the 6.9 as that's what drives our revenues. We factored in some additional revenue impacts positively for the Las Olas Marina and revenue sharing from that participation project, and the big one being the Bahia Mar revenue forecast. While during construction, we may see some impacts to our potential revenue stream for a couple of years, but in the long term, we'll have steady revenue streams from base charges, revenue sharing, as well as capacity payments for a period of 5 years from 2030 to it's actually 2034. On the expense side, we've factored in the additional debt for the police headquarters, $3.2 million starting in 26. We've also factored in anticipated increases in required pension contributions, as well as insurance fund contributions to restore fund balances for the next 3 years. And we've also factored in future service level enhancements, much like what you've talked about for the current year budget for the decision packages. We've tried to plan for that in the forecast to account for that based on historical trends, looking back at the historical decision packages and what those have been approved to try to plan for future service level enhancements as those do come up routinely as part of the annual discussion. So that's about $1.6 million a year that we've put in our forecast each year, and that increases to about $14.7 million by 2034. And so we put these into financial forecasting models, and I'm not going to try to dissect every line or row on this chart for you, but I really want to just focus on the top 3 rows. So the top row shows the millage rate for the general fund. So this is kind of a diagnostic scenario that says, based on all these assumptions of revenues and expenses, keeping our millage rate constant, what does our financial performance look like? And so we've kept the millage rate flat. The taxable value increases for fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, you can see. And then we've taken that account into future forecasting at 6.5% increases in taxable values for 26 and 27, and then 6% per year after that. And if you look at the lower left chart, that shows you some historical trends in taxable values, and the orange dashed line shows that current forecast attached to it to give you a sense of the conservatism on the taxable value assumptions. Yes, sir?
I do have a question on the forecast. So did any of your modeling include the possibility if the CRA did sunset that revenue? And also, we've been having discussions lately about a COLA for retirees, which has some financial impacts.
Mm-hmm.
Has any of your modeling dealt with those 2 issues at all?
So I'll speak to, actually, in a couple of slides, we did some analysis on CRA extension hypotheticals, so I'll have that to go over with you here just momentarily. And then I'll perhaps defer to Yvette and Laura about how we want to handle the conversation on the pension adjustment. So that's not specifically factored in per se.
Because I saw, I guess it wasn't, where was that? On page 9, it does talk about CRA, but in terms of if it continues, the impacts. But I didn't see anything the other way.
Yeah, so we have the baseline scenario that we're looking at here assumes that it's not extended, and then we did scenarios that I'll show you in a moment that assume it's extended, or maybe if there's a hybrid approach where it's like partially extended, where we only fund half of it to the CRA and half to the general fund.
So this in front of us here is if it's not extended?
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
And Vice Mayor, we didn't create scenarios to address the potential COLA, but we do have attachment 9 to the preliminary budget. So this model would essentially get worse by $1.4 million a year if it was financed over 5 years, $1 million if it was financed over 7 years, or fund balance would drop by $6 million if it was a one-time lump sum hit. So those would be the 3 options. So that negative $32 million would be negative $33 million. Or the fund balance would be lower. Those would in the general fund.
Thank you, Laura. And so the line that Laura just highlighted for us was the 3rd row I wanted to talk about, which is the annual cash flow surplus or deficit. In the current year that we're in, as we go through the year, we'll make mid-year appropriations from fund balance as we have some of those options available for one-time funding. But then as we look to 25, you can see, again, consistent with the conversation, the structurally balanced budget. So we need the revenues and the expenses to match in 25, and you can see that they do. And then as we play forward assumptions, and so as you pointed out, Vice Mayor, we are not extending the CRA in this baseline scenario. If it expires, that positively impacts us in 26, so that despite increases in some of these cost requirements, 26 is almost effectively structurally balanced as we sit here today. If the CRA, we let it sunset, and we keep the millage rate the same based on what we have today. But then in 2027, we don't get an additional benefit of another CRA expiring. The Northwest Progressive would just be that one-time benefit. So then we have inflation, plus we have some other notable expenses in 27 that I'll go over in a minute that would put us in a really challenging cash flow position from that point going forward in the status quo, where we keep the millage rate the same and based on these taxable value assumptions going forward. Yes, Mayor.
I'm not understanding the 2024 deficit. Explain are we now in a deficit situation?
No, it's really utilization of fund balance for some one-time items as part of the mid-year appropriation process.
So we're taking $11 million out of fund balance in order to balance our budget for 2024?
No, I'll let Laura speak to it more cleanly.
So in 2024, you had mid-year appropriations for collective bargaining agreements and various items. That's all part of the projections, but yes, those are mid-year items that we have to subtract out because we have to pay for them in 24. They won't be available in 25.
Okay, but I'm still not, to the public, we're looking at a cash flow deficit of $11 million for this year.
Around $12 million in mid-year appropriations came forward to the commission from the general fund, and that's how we account for them in the model.
And how did we arrive at that situation a year ago when we anticipated a balanced budget?
So some of the items that came forward were related to collective bargaining agreements that settled after the time the budget was adopted, and so those are now baked into an adopted or a proposed budget in 2025 that is structurally balanced. Part of it was related to FEMA appropriations from the general fund to match so FEMA requires a local match, and so at the time we appropriated funding to do all the things we had to do because City Hall was no longer operational. That was a part of it. I can give you a full list of items that brought forward, but these were already items that were approved through the budget amendment process. The good news is even after those items, due to savings and how 23 shook out, we're above our target in our fund balance in the general fund. So we're still in a good financial position, but there were unplanned items beyond what you included in the adopted budget.
So when we set aside money in anticipation of reaching an agreement with our police and fire units, the amount of money that we ultimately agreed to pay exceeded those projections that we had budgeted for the 2024 fiscal year?
Yes, and there were some retroactive payments from the prior fiscal year as well. So there were some savings in 23 that we had to appropriate in 24. In addition, there were benefits that hadn't previously been offered to those groups that were added, and we had to take that from fund balance in the first year and then build it into a structurally balanced budget in subsequent years.
Okay, so given all of that, we still have a fund balance, though.
We have a fund balance that exceeds our target
And what is our target?
Our target is 111.9 million is what our estimate is for heading into 2025, and our target is 105.8 million. So the surplus is 6.1 million. Understanding some changes that have happened since preliminary, the proposed budget right now anticipates using 1.5 of that, leaving $4.5 million above our target to be used on one-time item.
And explain to us what target means. Is that like a percentage of the total general fund budget?
Yes, it's 3 months. So it's 25% is our target. So GFOA recommends at a minimum 2 months, and that's for operating cash flow.
Isn't that our policy? So our policy is not 3 months. The commission's policy is 2 months.
The minimum is 2 months. We've memorialized in prior policies and through budget documents that the target is 3 months, the minimum is 2 months.
Right.
Let me back up on that because, so we as a matter of practice have been doing 3 months because Lee Feldman wanted to be a AAA bond rated city. The commission never adopted 3 months as its policy. The only policy we've ever formally adopted was 2 months.
I'll check on that. I think our financial sustainability practices say the minimum is 2 months, the target's 3, and anything above 3 will be used on one-time capital.
But those were developed by staff, not by the commission.
The financial integrity policies were approved by the commission.
All right,
it looks like Linda's coming up to give us a little clarity.
So help me with this one.
Absolutely. So the city did bring forth a financial integrities principles and policies, which was adopted by commission. And in there, it did have that enterprise funds, the water and sewer would have a 90-day reserve. and that was adopted
I'm
by
sorry,
commission.
the enterprise funds had a 90-day reserve.
90 for water and sewer and 45 for the other ones.
Okay, so general fund is 45.
No, general fund
I'm sorry,
is
go back.
16%. I
I'm
was
sorry?
talking about water and sewer fund. General fund is 16%.
Still 16%?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
It's 16% of the general fund budget.
Right, that's a 2-month.
Expenditures,
2 months
correct.
of expenses.
And that's approximately 2 months
Right.
worth of operating
16,
costs?
right.
That's correct.
And that's the standard in the industry, right?
That's a GFOA recommended practice. That is
Right.
correct,
But
and that's
this-
the minimum.
But the city has always opted for a much higher minimum, correct?
And we have,
Well,
so what we,
Hang on, not always, because our policy used to be 7%. So the city is
used to be
not always. So
10%,
going back
yeah.
to the George Gretzis days, our policy was 7%, and then we bumped it to 12%, and then we bumped it to 17%.
Right.
And
Okay, but
So,
in the
yeah,
George-
guys-
in the
that's what we've
George, in the
always
George
done.
Gretzis days, our fund balance was $863,000, so we didn't have
No,
a
actually, it was
fund balance.
$83,000.
all right,
Yeah,
so,
we didn't have a fund balance.
and
so-
just one more thing, also, you do have a commission-adopted debt policy, that in that debt policy, it talks about what we want our target to be, and that was also adopted by commission, and we wanted our policy to be, the minimum is 16.67%, but we're wanting at 25 is what the debt policy says,
Okay,
and
well,
that was adopted by commission.
All right, that's much sounder planning. I agree with you 100%.
Thank you.
But I just wanted to clarify that for myself and for those listening as to how we're arriving at these numbers, because numbers, can be confusing, and I want everyone to understand how we arrived at those numbers. So, to recapitulate, in order to balance the budget for 2024, we are taking money out of our fund balance, which is our savings account, and to cover retroactive pay increases and compensation packages for contracts that were entered into during this fiscal year, and to also pay for current fiscal year contracts that the commission agreed to. And that still keeps us over the 3-month target that we have been following this past fiscal year. Okay, just wanted to clarify.
So Mayor, if I want to add something to that, because this 3-month policy for our debt covenants, all right, for our debt policy, let me be clear so everybody understands this. When the Wall Street rating agencies take a look at various cities and how much they keep in reserves, they're not doing this with the taxpayers in mind. They don't care if we overtax our residents and stick it in a savings account. All they care about is having the highest degree of certainty that the bondholders will get paid back. And so I have always objected to keeping 25% of our operating funds in reserves. We are overtaxing our residents simply to keep it in our bank account and not in their bank account. It's, I think, candidly egregious that we should be taking money and putting it, in our bank account. It belongs in the taxpayers' pockets. And the GFOA recommended 2 months was actually something I pushed 10, 12 years ago to get us up from the 7.5% that we were at back in 2006, 2008. And that seemed to be a fairly reasonable industry-based standard. But when the movement was made to get a AAA bond rating, which doesn't save us that much, by the way, in terms of our borrowing costs, we bumped up to this 20 and then 25% level. And I've always argued that was excessive. So I just want to leave that on the table. But the other comments, which I think are important to discuss, is the use of fund balance for one-time payments as opposed to ongoing payments, again, is very, very standard financial practice within the municipal arena. So the thing that we always strive not to do is use fund balance to fund ongoing operating expenses. But with respect to the things that you were talking about before, the collective bargaining agreements, we have always done this. We have always, in fact, when I was the auditor and we would do our budget review, we would always point out that we failed to budget for contractual issues that were still under negotiation, because there's no way to know what that final number is.
But we did set a certain
We
amount.
put money in there, but then at the end of the year, it falls back to fund balance anyway. So
Well,
that's...
we ended up giving more generous compensation packages than we originally budgeted, but I do believe staff had inserted a number in anticipation of what would be something that just, they picked a number, and we all lived with it, and we said, okay, let's see if we can reach that target. But we exceeded that. We gave more generous compensation packages for good reason. I mean, retention.
Well, but not quite. What they do is they budget the number that is in the city's proposal. They don't budget the number that's going to be the final negotiated figure, because they don't know what the final negotiated figure is
that's what
going
I'm
to
saying.
be.
I'm saying the same
Right.
thing.
But with a lot of it, though, you have to remember, too, fire is a good example. Fire across 2 fiscal years, if I remember correctly. So, and when you're doing that, you're basically pulling money out of fund balance to cover all those prior years that we didn't have that collective bargaining agreement approved. So what I'm trying to get at is, Mayor, this is very typical, is that money is sitting in fund balance available to be appropriated for this thing, because one of the things that the budget office doesn't want to do is in negotiations put a big number in there so the union knows how much they're bargaining towards.
Well, and that's and exactly that was the strategy. But going forward, I see in 2025 we see a zero amount from the fund balance, which is important and appropriate. I'm going to disagree with you on the appropriateness of having AAA rating versus less than AAA rating. I think it's always best to be rated AAA, but that's a subject for another time. But I think that we're in a really good financial position, much better than we've been in the past, especially since we're not taking money out of our water and sewer enterprise funds, and we're using simply the fund balance, which we accumulate every year anyway, so that we do have it for the rainy day, which is what happened this year. But I can see for 2025, our budget that you're proposing is to have zero depletion of our fund balance, and I think that's where we always want to be.
Structurally balanced, yes, sir.
And that's right, and that's what we refer to as a structurally balanced budget, where your ongoing revenues are sufficient for your ongoing expenditures. But the reason I bring this up is because I want to make sure that there's no hesitancy to look at fund balance as a source for one-time expenditures. So if we do have one-time needs, that's what fund balance is there for. It's not just a rainy day fund.
And that's true, but I think we just heard that the money we did take from the fund balance were for recurring expenses.
No, it was not for, that's the point I'm trying to make, Mayor. It was not for recurring expenses. It was for the one-time catch-up on the things that we didn't budget for at the time that we were in collective bargaining. We didn't know what those retroactive payments were going to be. So that's all a one-time expenditure. That's the ongoing cost of the collective bargaining agreements, the CBAs, are baked into the budget going forward. We're not using fund balance for ongoing expenses.
All right, let's hope not. Please proceed.
I think that was well said. And there's 2 red squares on here that I want to go into, and the Vice Mayor picked up on one about the CRA extension, and then also I wanted to speak to some of the additional costs that we're trying to plan ahead for as part of this forecast and what we're looking at. So if you looked at 27, you saw that cash flow deficit grew. We were basically effectively almost structurally balanced in 26 in addition to 25, but 27 was about $30 million of a deficit. And a big portion of that, I've identified what those drivers are for the assumptions in the analysis. We've included the net expenditure obligation for the city's portion for the Swimming Hall of Fame. It's about $1.9 million per year based on estimates from PFM and the analysis there. We've also factored in the annual cost for the Los Olas Downtown Garage or the Heron Lot Fire Rescue, $2 million a year. As I mentioned at the onset, allowing for an annual repayment expense for constructing a new City Hall facility. The portion for the general fund would be $6.5 million on a $10 million annual payment. And then community investment plan that Office of Management Budget just went through. You saw spikes in 27 that was up to about 28 or 29, maybe actually $30 million. So it was about $8.1 million increase in the capital in that year. And so there's about $18.5 million of additional expenses in that year, in addition to inflation on prior year. The other contributing factor is that in that prior model run, we assumed that the current Northwest Progresso CRA sunset in fiscal 26, and so that additional revenue that's being transferred out to the CRA stayed within the general fund. That's a little over $10 million.
Let's stop right there for a second.
Yes, sir.
Because we have had a conversation here on the commission about continuing the CRA or something like the CRA going forward to continue with the mission that's just now begun. So are you saying that $10 million, if we were deciding to use that $10 million that we accumulate right now from the CRA, if we were to try to use that to reinvest in the CRA region, you're saying that we would not have that available to pay for the general fund expenses?
That's right. So this scenario here assumed that that money did not go to the CRA after it sunset, and then it went to the general fund. And so we did run a couple scenarios, though, that said, well, what happens if that money stays in the CRA?
Right.
And this is where we just ran a couple of scenarios, Mayor, to understand the impacts, to say what would happen if the CRA was extended, the full CRA, through the entire 10-year forecast.
Right.
And so what that would mean is that to balance the budget basically in 2026, all else being equal, we'd have to have a $250,000 increase to offset that. If we just did, say, a 50% transfer, we did kind of a hybrid option, then it would be basically a 0.125 millage rate increase. But we could run several different scenarios based upon the commission's direction of hybrid options for different time periods that would affect that financial forecast and outlook for the general fund. But we ran two to just tee up this very conversation, knowing that it had been an issue that's been discussed.
So, and that's based on a 6.9%? What was your?
Yeah, so we have the 6.9% for this year.
So if it goes above 6.9%, obviously that's extra money we'll be able to use. We don't have to increase taxes.
That's right.
All right. And we have been told that next year, we're probably going to see a larger increase in a taxable base based on new construction that will be completed next year. So, all right, these are just variables that we have to think about.
Exactly. And this is why we take the forward-looking approach to help you understand these variables and the sensitivities to do exactly, I think, what you're doing, which is mentally frame your decision alternatives, knowing where some of these sensitivities may lie.
All right, back to your next slide. What's this Swimming Hall of Fame cost? What is that about?
So I'll defer to Susan on that.
So Mayor, what we put in there, if you remember, there was a range of possibilities from break even to, I think it was 3-point-something million on the negative. So what this is kind of the halfway scenario. So we put in more of a worst case. It could wind up being break even, and that's a 0.
Okay, so my understanding was once we completed the renovations and the dive tower, that we would have we wouldn't have these costs because we need to start programming that facility. And are you saying that we're not yet programming the facility to the
I think
point?
this is for the two new buildings on the east and west. This isn't that.
Oh, this is for iShop.
This is the
iShop,
coming
that's
project.
correct.
Ah, I'm sorry.
Right.
Okay.
And so that number could be 0 if we were at best case, and this is more
Oh,
of
okay.
a.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I remember that scenario. Okay,
So
thank you.
it did range from, I think, break
Okay.
even, as the acting city manager was pointing out, to I think maybe a negative $3 million per year. And so we kind of took the
Right, I get
more
that.
middle-ish
Okay,
part
all
of
right.
the scenario.
Thank you for, now I recall. Okay, sorry.
And so we just did simple screen captures of those two scenarios that we ran, but there's others that we'd be happy to run and provide if the mayor and commission were so desire for different CRA options. But we prepared those two just as a starting point to the conversation.
Can I just say one thing? I see you have 42 pages.
We're not going through all
We're
of
not going to
those.
get through 42 pages.
No, that
At
wasn't
some
the
point,
point.
we need a summary because we have another meeting to start shortly.
That's right. So no, we were just going to get through the general fund, which we're almost complete with, and then talk
Okay.
about water and sewer, stormwater and sanitation. And the back half of the presentation was just only if you had questions.
Okay.
And so these screen captures, I'm really not going to spend time on because I really summarize the results here in terms of the impacts. These are
Right.
just showing you the outcomes of the model. So if you want to look at those, you can. We did also run a scenario that just said, if we wanted a structurally balanced budget and all these cost requirements hit in 27, what would then have to be the millage adjustments to offset that, assuming that was the solving solution as opposed to service level adjustments. And so that would say that we may have to increase the millage in 27 by about $0.5 and then again periodically in 2031 and 2034. And this was just, again, predicated on that key assumption on the bottom left, Mayor, that you highlighted in terms of this is based on that current conservative, hopefully conservative forecast on taxable value increases. And if we get better news on that each year, we'll certainly factor that into the forecast. But based on the current trajectory, this is where we are with the forecast at the moment.
Do these numbers include the money earned from Bahia Mar?
They do.
They do, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Please proceed.
Okay, and then on the millage rate, this is a great eye test. It's really the detail of just in Broward County, the history of millage adjustments of all the communities. So you can see in 27, just about everybody had a millage rate reduction. That's the down orange arrow, and then the recession. had some increases for many agencies in 2008 through 2010. Then it's been kind of a bit sporadic since then and pretty steady in recent years. But if you look at the very bottom, we can see Fort Lauderdale. We've been steady on our millage rate at 4.1193 for 17 years. So the average increase across the county during that same time period has been about 37%. And so it's maybe easier just to digest and take in at this level. If you look at the average millage rate across the county, that's the orange line. And then you can see our millage rate for the past 17 years is the black line. So we're basically about a third lower than the average millage in the county. And if you go forward, it looks like next year will be the 18th year of no increase, and possibly 26.
So Broward County's increased their taxes 36%.
Well, this is the average of the municipalities in the county. So if you look at the average on
it's
this
not
chart.
the county, it's the county
all,
cities. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's all the cities in the county.
I didn't think that was the case.
Yeah. No, it's the average of all the municipal agencies within the county. So just again, give some perspective. So we do have one of the lowest tax rates in Broward County. That's it on the general fund. So water and sewer, stormwater and sanitation, if you'll indulge me. So with the water and sewer fund, we have a lot of the same information that we've been planning for over the last few years, especially relative to Prospect Lake. So those numbers haven't really changed. What we have adjusted is really the plan of finance for the AMI program, doing some refinancing now to save money on our interest rates, on our bonds, and then looking at going forward for our infrastructure, trying to leverage a line of credit before we take out bonds to basically minimize our interest expenses as we go through the construction process, and only firmly take out the final debt when we're ready. And so the forecast for the water and sewer system is largely consistent with what we're looking at last year. So by ordinance, you've already approved the rate adjustments for water and sewer through 2027. So that's why that box is highlighted at the top. We had been planning on using fund balance in 24, and that was part of the discussion to use level debt financing for this fund. We knew we were going to take that hit, but lower the interest expense over the life of the debt. And so we're on track to get our reserves to the 3-month target by 26. And if you look at 27, I've circled that cash flow number because that's a pretty critical year, because that's when the availability payment starts for Prospect Lake, our incremental O&M, and so we need to have our revenues match those expenses in that year. And so all this to basically say that our current plan looks pretty good for water and sewer in terms of no surprises on the forecast, and to stick with the approved plan of adjustments that we have in place for today.
Well, does your chart suggest that we can lower the cost for each ratepayer? You're generating a huge surplus.
Well, potentially in 2031 through 34, and so that's where we may look at potentially adjusting the indexing assumptions at that point in time. But that's, again, we want to get into the Prospect Lake, make sure we get some of the infrastructure financing complete. So that cone of variability as you look towards the end of a 10-year forecast gets pretty big. So, it may be such that if everything holds exactly true, Mayor, we could look at less than a 5% increase in the future. But in the near term, for the next year, 2-3 years, we really need to state a plan that the Commission previously approved. And so some benchmarking for water and sewer. We did a few different bill comparisons for low volume users at, say, 3,000 gallons a month of water use against the other agencies within the county. So you can see, again, with our rate structure, which is very affordability and conservation oriented, we have a lower bill at the 3,000 gallon level. And we've just identified in the box some of the other agencies with, planned increases. Several of the agencies have planned increases. We just grabbed a few to give you some examples. And a couple relevant points. We've been adjusting our rates to fund a significant water plant improvement. Coral Springs just adopted a rate plan to start doing the same with their water plant. And what they approved was a 5-year plan of 9.5% increases for water through 28, but the rate study actually showed that was a 10-year plan for Coral Springs. And Tamarack will be having conversations about rate increases to fund a water plant that are looking at 15% a year for the next 5 years. So again, we're seeing more pressure building on water and sewer rates, particularly in this region, especially given significant infrastructure needs. So again, this is a snapshot in time, and we're going to see others have to make some similar adjustments to like what we've had to do the last couple of years. And we also did comparisons for a more typical user at 5,000 gallons. You can see we're still within range. And then as we look at, say, a larger bill for maybe 8,000 gallons of use, this is where our conservation rate structure kicks in. So for higher levels of usage, you again will have a price signal to incentivize conservation associated with that. But again, a lot of these bills are going to have movement to the right as we move forward in time, and they tackle a lot of the challenges that we've been tackling the last couple of years. Any questions on water and sewer before I move to stormwater and
Any questions
sanitation?
on water and sewer? Okay, we may have to end it there because we do have to take a break between now and the next meeting. But I think you've pretty much captured most of the presentation.
Stormwater.
On stormwater? Okay.
Yeah, I could be really quick on stormwater.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
So with stormwater, the biggest changes are the infrastructure, and as part of the Fortify Lauderdale plan, accelerating some of the projects. And so that represents more capital dollars sooner in the forecast than what we were looking at last year. However, because of, again, looking at utilizing interim financing before we take out the debt, it's giving us some time to spread those costs of that infrastructure out. So last year when we were together, last summer, we were looking at 10% increase in the stormwater fee, but we've added more capital and we've accelerated it. And when we looked at the impacts of that before, it was compressed. It actually had to be a 35% increase next year. But because of the interim financing assumptions, we've been able to levelize this out and have the increase be at a 15% level, which on an annual or on a monthly basis means about $3.50 on an effective monthly basis for the assessment. But this is what we would need to move forward with to accommodate the additional O&M needs, to cover the maintenance of the infrastructure and the capital, and to go through and start completing the next tranche of projects that I know are being prioritized to continue down that path of fortifying the infrastructure. And one quick comparison, so stormwater, we just prepared some other costs for coastal communities. Just to highlight a couple notable adjustments. So Naples is actually looking at a 40% increase in 25, and then a 55% increase on top of that in 26. St. Pete's looking at 25% and 15. So we're seeing a lot of upward movement on stormwater just because of the resiliency elements affecting so many coastal communities. So we're going to see a lot of upward movement. In fact, 2 years from now, Naples will probably be at the top of this chart from the looks of it. So just again, giving you some context on where you sit with stormwater. Okay, that's about as fast as I can do stormwater. Hopefully that's good enough.
Okay, great. Anyone have any questions? Okay, there being none. So really, thank you so much. We really appreciate the presentation. It gives us a lot to digest. Does anyone from the board have any comments they would like to add to what the chair has stated so far? You want to, any comments? You're all good? Okay. Yeah.
When is that? When's the next workshop? Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, so Jeff, you have any concluding comments you'd like to make? You're good? Okay, Laura, any concluding comments?
I just would want to remind you that at the July 2nd meeting, at your next meeting, you'll be setting that stormwater assessment. You'll be setting that fire assessment, all of the rates we talked about today. So the numbers that we went through today are what will be brought forward unless we receive different direction.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right, I guess that concludes our workshop. Thank you so much. We'll resume in about 20, 25 minutes.
Thank you.